This is a glimpse of how the Tennessee Valley looked and how the people lived before TVA came in. They come into these mountains, these hollers, these valleys, and set up their homes, farms, and raised a family. And we'll see what they look like here before TVA came in. Now, here's what the lakes look like today, our riverways. They're lakes, the backwaters. Back in the day before TVA, the waters flowed free from the Clinch, the Holston, French Broad, Powell River. Just beautiful. Now here's the Tennessee Valley area as you look at it on a map today. A lot of it was just wilderness, untouched. Here's the counties of East Tennessee. As they look today. Now these people come in this country and they set up communities, little forts to protect yourself from the Indians. So you must never forget the great Cherokee people owned all this land as far as the eye could see in any direction. Now these people come into East Tennessee trying to find a better homeland from the East Coast and started little communities and little places like this right here in the mountains. Most of them was isolated up these hollers, back in these mountains where the sun didn't hit it but a few hours a day. And these people live hard. They lived off the land, built their cabins out of the wilderness with their own bare hands. And they either made it, traded for it, or they done without. That was just the way mountain people was. And up to the Civil War, as things got bad in the South here, but there was no major engagements except for Knoxville in the Civil War here. But it took a lot of good men away from it. But after the Civil War, they tried to rebuild and get back on with their life in these mountains in East Tennessee, trying to build their homes. And they made their living a lot around these riverways, these river bottoms. They were rich and fertile for thousands of years. So they got most of their living around these rivers, these fertile bottoms. They growed their own crops, worked the land, and provided for their needs. Just like they did, their fathers did, and their fathers before them since they settled this country. A lot of them lived off the river too. These waterways was the way they traveled goods down to market. So a lot of them lived off and worked off these riverways. And they had big families too. They believed in the family. Now a lot of these old farming communities had big families, and they had homes like this, a lot of them on the big farms with a lot of land. But most people live like this, off in these hollers and these ridges, and they raised their family just like this. Now growing up, it was a tradition. You learned how to hunt as long as you was old enough to walk behind Dad and big enough to know how to hunt. That was just a tradition in these mountains. And you learned to work on the farm, whatever you need, whatever needed to be done, you worked this farm. This was your livelihood. And when you had crops come in, what extra you had, if you had big fields on these big farms, they would sell it. This is how they made their money, whether it be tobacco, corn, whatever. And these mountain people, they didn't nothing go to waste. Canning was a big thing. I mean, they canned everything. If it was able to be canned, it was canned. And this is how they survived the winter months in these mountains of East Tennessee. They even made their own moonshine. And they sure made their own entertainment. A lot of good musicians come out of these mountains, bluegrass, country, even rock. A lot of good musicians. Now, back then there was no electricity, except for maybe the big cities had electricity. It was a generator. Most of them run off coal oil lamps or kerosene. This is their livelihood, light at night. And everybody in the communities usually had a mill that they went to. And these mills provided them to make cornmeal and flour and stuff like that. So they would take their crops and make their cornmeal and stuff off of. Now, every community had a little school. Some were bigger than others, according on the community size, but everybody had a little school they went to. It looked something like this. Some schools were even smaller, half a dozen children, but they tried to teach them read and write, arithmetic. And everybody that was anybody went to their community church and supported it. Back then, just about every little old church would have a baptizing in any creek or river in their community. This here's Clinch River, the original 33 bridge here. Everybody had baptizing somewhere. Now back in the 29, it had the Great Depression hit. Stock market crashed. A lot of people lost their jobs, but it didn't affect it here in the country too bad. People lived off farms anyway. Didn't have no money to start with. So, but in the cities, it kind of affected everybody. So in 1936, Franklin D. Roosevelt was elected, and he come up with a plan to solve all this problem with depression and solve 2 or 3 problems at one time with the brand new deal. And one in the brand new deal, he was going to dam up all these riverways to provide electricity for the rural areas and control this flooding. Now here is all of what TVA takes care of. You can see all the states and areas all in the brown. And here, these are what we're talking about is East Tennessee. The lakes here in East Tennessee. And right here is a list of all the lakes in East Tennessee dams. There's a bunch of them. But Norse was the first dam built. Now, a lot of communities got displaced while doing this in East Tennessee. Here on Norse Lake here, they built this lake. They had to displace some communities. And the biggest one was Lewiston, Tennessee, and Norse Lake. This is what it looked like. Here's what it looks like today. Depending on the lake level, it may be 100 foot underwater. Some say it was just submerged, some say it was dismantled. Here's Cherokee Lake. It had a lot of little communities displaced and moved. Bean Station was one of them, a bunch of little communities around that. This is Fontana Lake. It's not in Tennessee, but it borders the Tennessee line here in the Smokies. There was a lot of communities displaced there, logging communities. And this is Watauga Dam, the only earth dam that Tennessee Valley authorities ever built. This town had to be relocated. It's Butler. There's a whole story on this. It's around Elizabeth in Tennessee. And when they made these lakes, they tore down all the bridges and they isolated most of it. Like here, Chuck Swan. This was a thriving community just off Sharp's Chapel, and they isolated it. Now this old Tennessee Valley still goes on. It's a beautiful place. It thrives today. These waterways are so beautiful, but a lot of our history is passed underneath them. So we try to remember what we can. So these old waterways, they go on forever. Lake after lake. So beautiful, so vast. So I hope you enjoyed this bit of history today on what it was like for these mountain people of East Tennessee before TVA came in here. It's such a beautiful place. So I thank y'all for watching, and I'll see you next time.